The cornfield did not survive the landing. Neither did the fence, the old water tower, or the rusted gate that had stood at the edge Offrey salvage yard for 31 years. One moment they were there. The next, something came down from the sky like a thrown stone and carved a black scar across 400 meters soft, flat Missouri ground. Ray was in his workshop when it happened. The walls shook. A jar of bolts fell off the shelf. His dog, a fat beagle named Chunk, ran under the workbench and refused to come out. Ray waited for the shaking to stop, pulled on his boots, grabbed a flashlight, and walked outside. The thing in his field was not a plane. It was long, maybe 60 meters, and shaped like something between a fish and a closed fist. The hull was a dark blue-gray, and it had lines running through it that glowed faintly, the way embers glow just before they go cold. There was a hole torn in the side of it, ragged and leaking pale smoke. The nose was buried 2 meters into the ground. Ray stood at the edge of the scar and looked at it for a while. Then one of the creatures climbed out of the hole in the hull that was tall, maybe 2.5 meters. It had 6 limbs for legs and 2 arms, and skin the color of storm cloud. Along its back, a row of ridges ran from neck to hip, and they were lit a dim red. It moved slowly, like something that had been through a fight and lost some of it. In one hand, it held a device that beeped every few seconds. In the other, nothing. It was not holding a weapon that saw Ray. Ray saw it. Neither of them moved. Then the creature made a sound, low, clicking with something almost like a word underneath it, and 2 more of them climbed out behind it. One was smaller, moving fast, already looking at the hull breach with wide dark eyes. The other was carrying what looked like a medical bag and heading toward the hole without stopping. Ray watched this for a moment. Then he walked forward. The tall one moved into a wide stance. Its ridge lights went from red to a sharper, brighter. Ray stopped walking. He held up both hands, flashlight pointed at the ground, not at the creature. He waited. The creature stared at him. Ray said, "How bad is it?" He did not expect an answer. He got none. But the creature's ridge lights shifted, just slightly, from sharp red to something murkier. Still warning, but with a question in it. Ray looked past it at the ship. He could see the tear in the hull from where he stood. He could see the smoke coming from inside, and the way the glow lines on the hull flickered in 3 places. He had fixed enough broken things in his life to know the look of something that was running out of time, that he pointed at the hull breach. He mimed a patching motion with his hands. The tall creature said nothing, but it stepped aside. Ray walked up to the ship. The inside of the breach was a mess of torn metal and melted material, and exposed wiring that looked like no wiring Ray had ever seen. Crystalline, almost threaded through metal-like veins. Some of it was still active. Some of it was dead. Atmosphere was leaking out of a pressure seal that had partially failed. He could hear it hissing. He went back to his workshop. He came back with his welding rig, a roll of industrial patch tape rated for pressure environments, 2 clamps, and a thermos of coffee. The small creature, the one who had been looking at the hull, was crouched nearby watching him. Its ridge lights were a confused yellow. Ray set up his rig, checked the breach edges, and started working. He worked for 2 hours. The creatures watched him. A few more came out of the ship as the smoke inside cleared. Ray counted 12 of them total. Some were hurt. The one with the medical bag moved between them. The small one never moved from Ray's shoulder. Around 5 in the morning, Ray finished the primary patch on the breach and sealed the pressure leak. The hissing stopped. The glow lines around the sealed area steadied. Ray stood up, stretched his back, and drank some coffee. The tall creature, the one who had stepped aside for him, walked up and looked at the patch. Ran one hand along the edge of it. It pressed. It held. The creature's ridge lights shifted. For just a moment, they went gold. Ray did not know what gold meant. But it did not look like a bad thing. He pulled out his phone and called his cousin Dale. Dale knew a woman named Nadia who worked in aerospace. Ray did not call the police. He did not call the news. He called someone who could help, because the ship was broken and the creatures in it were hurt, and in Ray's experience, that was the only thing that actually mattered. "I've got something here," he said when Dale picked up. "What kind of something?" Ray looked at the ship. He looked at the 12 creatures watching him from beside it. He looked at the tall one, whose ridge lights were still faintly gold in the Missouri dark. The kind we're going to need Nadia for, he said by sunrise. The crew of the Vorth ship was still alive. The atmosphere inside had stabilized. Point 3 injured were breathing steadily. The ship was broken in 17 different ways that Ray could see, and probably more that he could not. But it was still there, and so were they. Nadia arrived at 7 in the morning with a camera, a notepad, and a bag of tools she had packed without knowing what she was packing for. She stood at the edge of the scar in Ray's field. She looked at the ship. She looked at the 12 alien creatures standing beside it. She looked at Ray, who was eating a breakfast sandwich and leaning against his truck like this was a regular Tuesday. "You could have warned me," she said. "I did warn you," Ray said. "I said it was something big." Nadia put her camera up and started taking photographs. Ara watched this small human woman walk toward the ship without slowing down, snapping photographs of every panel, every seal, every line of exposed system along the hull. Ara's fridge lights shifted uncertain orange. She moved to block the path. Nadia stopped, looked up at her, and held up the camera. Then she held up the notepad. Then she pointed at the ship. The gestures were clear enough. She was not here to take. She was here to understand. Ara stepped aside. Nadia spent 4 hours going over the outside of the ship. She did not touch anything. She only looked and photographed and wrote. Run, the young engineer who had barely slept, followed her at a distance, watching her note every section with a sharp accuracy that made his ridge lights go from suspicious orange to something close to curious yellow. Like tea midday, Nadia sat down on a crate, spread her notepad open, and looked at Ren. She pointed at the drive section of the ship, the part with the worst damage. The cracked crystallattice core that Ron had already decided was unfixable in the field. She drew a rough shape in her notepad. She held it up. Ren looked at the drawing. It was not right, but it was close. He took the pen from her hand, crossed out part of her drawing, and drew the correct configuration. Nadia studied it. She asked nothing. She drew an arrow from one component to another and raised her eyebrows. Ren nodded. She drew another arrow. He shook his head and redirected it. This went on for 20 minutes. To the end of it, Nadia had a rough, functional diagram of the drive core. She sat back and looked at it. Ren watched her face. He was waiting for the expression most beings gave at this point, the blank look that meant they had reached the edge of their understanding. Nadia did not give that look. She tapped her pen against the diagram and looked like someone solving a puzzle she had seen a version of before. That was when BOLO showed up. Nobody had invited him. He was 16, lived 2 farms over, and had heard the impact the night before. He had spent the morning convincing himself it was a gas explosion. Then Heck climbed the back fence and saw the ship and walked straight toward it before his brain had time to stop him. Ren blocked his path. BOLO looked up at the 6-limbed gray alien in front of him and said, "What does the glowing cylinder do?" Ren stared at him. "The one in the middle section," BOLO said, pointing. "It's still active. The rest of the drive looks dead, but that one's still cycling." "What?" Ren turned and looked at the cylinder in question. He turned back. He had no way to explain it. He reached out and drew a spiral in the air with one finger. The motion of a drive cycling through spatial compression. Bolo's eyes went wide. "That's like a turbocharger," he said. "But for space-time." Ren did not know what a turbocharger was. His expression said so. BOLO immediately jigged to Ray's workshop and came back rolling an old engine on a cart. He pointed at the turbocharger mounted on it. He explained, with his hands mostly, how it worked. Pressure feeding pressure, efficiency building on itself, a loop that made more than it cost. Ren was quiet for a long time. Then he crouched down and looked at the engine very carefully. That evening, Daira was working on the last of the 3 critical patients when she ran out of a specific compound she needed. She showed Ray the empty vial. Ray did not know what a compound did, but he could see from Daira's expression what it meant if she did not find something close to it. He called his neighbor, an old man named Walt who had spent 40 years as a veterinarian. Walt arrived, looked at the patient, and listened to Daira's gestured explanation with calm attention. He asked 3 questions using his own rough gestures. Daira answered them. Walt went to his truck and came back with his bag. 2 hours later, both critical patients were stable. Daira sat outside the ship in the grass. Her ridge lights were a quiet, stunned white that a government drone came over the tree line at dusk, scanning. Ray was talking to Nadia about the repair timeline. He did not look up. He reached behind him, picked up a .22 rifle that was leaning against the fence, and shot the drone out of the sky without breaking his sentence. Ara had been watching from the ship's ramp. Her ridge lights flickered. She walked to Ray. She pointed at the falling debris. Then at him. She made what she hoped was a questioning gesture. Ray said, "Probably not legal. Don't worry about it." Ara stood there for a moment. She went back inside. That night, Nadia spread 17 pages of notes across Ray's workbench and laid out our repair plan. It would take 4 weeks. It would use materials they could source locally, adapted to tolerances she had spent the day measuring. It had never been done before. Nothing about it was standard. Almost none of it was simple. She presented it to Ara using diagrams and a lot of pointing. Ara read every page. She read them twice. Then she looked at Nadia for a long moment. Her ridge lights went gold. She pressed one hand flat against the workbench, a gesture Nadia would later learn meant agreement, but carried more weight than that. It meant, "I am trusting you with something I cannot replace." Nadia nodded. She picked up her pen. They got to work. 2 weeks into the repairs, the ship looked like something that had been taken apart by several different people who were not talking to each other. Panels leaned against the hull in stacks. Wire bundles hung from open sections like ivy. Ren had 3 different projects running at once and a system for organizing them that only made sense to him and, increasingly, to BOLO. This was the part Ara had not prepared for. She had prepared for a difficult repair. She had prepared for the challenge of limited resources and alien tools. She had not prepared for BOLO. He was there every morning before anyone else. He had developed a method for passing tools to run that matched Ren's working rhythm so precisely that Ren no longer had to reach or turn or look. He just held out a hand and the right tool appeared. Ara had watched this for 3 days before she understood what she was seeing. The boy had learned Ren's patterns. He had done it on purpose. He had done it without being asked. She found this deeply strange and somehow very moving, and she did not know what to do with either feeling on the 14th day. Ray told everyone to stop working. This was a command Ara did not understand. The ship was not finished. They were ahead of schedule, but not done. There was no reason to stop. Ray said they were having a cookout. Ara did not know this word. Nadia explained it was a meal cooked outside, for everyone. Ara said they could eat inside, or separately. The repair schedule did not include meals cooked outside. Ray had already lit the fire. The Vorith crew came out one by one, uncertain. They sat in Ray's yard in the long evening light while Ray cooked. There were folding chairs and coolers, and Walt came over with Payan Bolo's mother-sent bread without asking what it was for. The yard smelled like smoke and cut grass and something sweet from the grill. Dyra was given a hot dog. She ate it. Her spine ridges went gold so fast and so bright that 3 crew members turned to look at her. She stood there with the remaining half of the hot dog in her hand, and her ridges blazing and an expression on her face that no Vorith word quite fit. Ray was watching. He walked over and gave her a plate with 4 more on it. Dyra ate all of them. Her ridges did not stop glowing. Later, after the food, Ara ended up on the barn roof. She had gone up to look at the sky the way she always did, checking vectors, reading the dark automatically, the habitat of a commander who never fully stopped working. Nadia came up after her with 2 cups of something hot and handed one over without asking. They sat in silence for a while. Nadia talked about her father first. He had been a mechanic, not spacecraft, just cars and trucks and the occasional tractor. He had a rule, she said, that you never called something unfixable until you understood exactly what was broken. Half the time, once you understood it, it wasn't unfixable at all. Just misunderstood. Ara listened. Then, without deciding to, she talked about the war. She started carefully. Facts, numbers, strategic assessments. But the careful part ran out before she expected it to. And then she was talking about the battle at Ven Station, where she had lost 11 crew and made the right call that still woke her up sometimes. She was talking about the shipyards at Dora Prime burning on long-range sensors while she was too far away to do anything. She was talking about the weight of a war that had been going on so long that some of her crew did not remember a time before it. Nadia did not give advice. She did not offer solutions. She did not say it would be fine. She sat there and she listened, and the listening was complete. No impatience in it, no waiting for her turn to speak. Just a person giving their full attention to another person who needed to be heard. Aura stopped talking eventually. She felt emptied out in a way that should have felt bad and did not. Is that how you fix people? Aura asked. You just listen? Nadia thought about it. Sometimes. Depends what's broken. Aura was quiet. We do not do that. Among my people, speaking of a battle that is over serves no function. The moment is gone. The moment is gone, Nadia agreed. But you're still carrying it. Aura had no answer for that point. 3 days later, a fragmented transmission came through on the ship's long-range receiver. Alliance frequency. Encrypted. Aura decoded it in her quarters and read it twice before she accepted what it said. Point 2, more shipyards destroyed. The Dovan sector lost. The front line had moved back further than any battle plan had accounted for. What remained of the Alliance fleet was holding a position that could not be held for long. Aura sat with this information for an hour. Then she went to find Nadia. She showed her the transmission without explaining it. Nadia read it. She had learned enough of the Vorith script from the diagrams to understand the key terms. She looked up at Aura. How long do they have? Nadia asked. If nothing changes, Aura said 7 months. Nadia looked at the transmission again. Then she said, what does the Dominion have that your fleet doesn't? Aura said adaptability. Their ships learn in combat. Ours are precision-built, strong but fixed. When the fight changes, we change our people. They change their ships. Nadia was quiet for a moment. She folded the transmission. She looked at the ship outside the window, half repaired, half transformed, glowing faintly in the yard. I need to draw something, she said. She went inside. Aura watched through the window as Nadia pulled out a fresh sheet off paper and began to draw very fast. The way someone draws when an idea is moving faster than their hand. Aura's ridge lights went a slow, thinking blue. She went back to work. Ray found her at 4 in the morning. He had gotten up to get water and seen the workshop light on. And when he pushed the door open, Nadia was standing in front of the wall with a marker in each hand and diagrams covering every surface she could reach. Papers were pinned over papers. 3 of Ray's chalkboards had been pulled from storage and covered in equations she had written so fast that some of the numbers ran into each other. Ray looked at the wall. He looked at Nadia. He poured 2 cups of coffee, put one next to her, and studied the diagrams for a while. This is going to get us arrested, he said. Possibly, she said, and kept drawing. The idea had come from the conversation with Aura. Precision versus adaptability. Vorith ships were built like fine instruments. Every component exactly placed, every system optimized to do one thing perfectly. That was their strength. It was also why they were losing. The Dominion's ships adapted mid-fight. They redistributed power. They took a hit and rerouted. Vorith ships took a hit and failed at the point of impact. Nadia had spent 30 hours thinking about how aerospace engineers dealt with the same problem. Human aircraft could not be perfect. They flew through unpredictable environments, took stress in unexpected places, operated far past their design conditions. So human engineers built in redundancy. Overlap. Multiple systems that could cover for each other. They built in flex, the ability to bend without breaking, to absorb instead of resist. She had designed a hybrid system. Vorith crystal lattice logic at the core, precise, powerful, irreplaceable, but wrapped in a human-style redundancy framework. Overlapping power routes. An impact distribution whole layer built on principles from crash test engineering. A drive system that could lose 30% of its components and still run, slower, but alive. IT was not elegant. It was dense and complicated, and frankly a little ugly. IT would not break. Ren arrived at 6. He stood in the doorway of the workshop, looking at the wall, and his ridge lights went the complicated orange of someone being asked to believe something unreasonable. Nadia handed him the main schematic, but he read it. His ridges stayed orange. He read it again. He found the first flaw, a power routing overlap that he was certain would cause an overload cascade. and went to his supply table to build a small test model to prove it. The model did not overload. The overlap dispersed the load instead of compounding it. His ridges flickered. He found a second flaw. Build another model. It also worked. By the fourth model, Ren was sitting on the floor of the workshop surrounded by small test components, and his ridge lights had gone from orange to the pale, slightly stunned yellow of someone whose map no longer matches the territory. He looked up at Nadia. He tapped the main schematic. He tapped his own chest. He made the question gesture. Yes, she said. I need you to tell me where it breaks. He stood up. He spent 3 hours going through the full design with her, flagging components that needed Vorth-specific handling, identifying 2 sections that required rework. He did not try to simplify it. He did not tell her to start over. He worked with what she had made and made it better. BOLO arrived mid-morning, took one look at the wall, and immediately started photographing everything on his phone. Nadia told him not to share any of it. He agreed without asking HFY. Afternoon. Ren had called the rest of the crew. They stood in the workshop, 12 Vorth, 2 humans, 1 teenager, while Ren explained Nadia's design in his own language, translating it into terms his crew could follow. Ara stood at the back and listened. When Ren finished, there was a silence. Then the crew voted. Ara did not tell them how to vote. She had made it clear this was their decision. It was their ship, their war, their lives. They voted to rebuild. All of them that IT would take 3 more weeks. The ship would not look like a Vorth vessel when they were done. It would look like something that did not have a name yet. Ara approved the plan. She stood with Ray in the yard that evening looking at the ship. Your people build everything this way? She asked. She had learned enough of his language now for simple sentences. What way? Like it will break. You plan for the breaking. Ray thought about this. I guess we know things break, he said. Doesn't mean you stop building. It means you build so it can break and still work. Ara was quiet for a moment. Her ridge lights moved through a slow blue. We build to not break, she said. And then when you do break. She did not answer. The next morning, 2 men in a black car with no plates drove up the access road. They parked at the edge of the field and sat for a moment. Then they got out. Ray, Nadia, BOLO, and all 12 Vorth were already standing in a line between the car and the ship. Nobody had said anything. Nobody had organized it. They were just there. The 2 men looked at the line. They looked at the ship behind it. They looked at the 12 large, 6-limbed alien beings with ridge lights that had all gone a very steady, very clear warning red at the same time. The men got back in the car. They drove away. Nobody spoke for a moment. Was that the government? BOLO asked. Part of it, Ray said. What do we do? Nothing, Ray said. They made their decision. That night, Ren ran the new drive core through a low-power ignition test. The barn filled with a deep blue light that hummed like something alive. Every piece of equipment Ray owned briefly stopped working and then restarted. Chunk the beagle ran outside, sat in the blue light, and wagged his tail. BOLO took a photograph. Ren looked at the photograph. He looked at BOLO. He let him keep it. On the last day of the 7th week, the ship was ready. IT did not look the same. Anyone who had seen it crash into that cornfield 7 weeks ago and now stood in Ray's yard looking at it would not immediately recognize it as the same vessel. The hull had been reshaped in 3 sections, smoothed in some places, reinforced in others, with human-built impact layers sitting over the original Vorth plating like Kia second skin. The glow lines still ran through it, but they ran further now, branching into the new sections like the ship had grown roots. That IT was not beautiful in the way Vorth ships were usually beautiful. It was a different kind of thing entirely. Ren called it rebuilt. Not repaired. Rebuilt. The word had come from Nadia that night on the roof, and it had spread through the crew without anyone making a decision about it. When they talked about the ship now, among themselves, they used the Vorth word that meant something that had been changed by what broke it. It was not a common word. It was usually used for people. The morning of departure started like any other morning on the farm. Ray made eggs. Bola showed up before anyone called him. Dyra sat in the garden section Ray's wife had planted years ago and had been growing food in ever since. Ara did systems checks. Ren checked the drive for the 4th time because he was run, and that was what he did. Then the small things happened that made the morning not like any other. Dyra was in the garden when Ray found her. She was crouched over the tomato plants, not touching them, just looking the way she had been doing for 2 weeks. She had spent a lot of time in this garden. Nobody had asked her to come here. She had found it herself one afternoon and returned to it every day since. Ray came and stood beside her. She looked up at him. She pointed at the tomatoes, then at herself. Her expression was clear. Asking, not demanding, Ray went inside. He came back with a cloth bag and filled it carefully with seeds from the envelopes he kept in the kitchen drawer. He put the bag in her hands. Dyra looked at the bag for a long moment. Her ridge lights were a pale, steady gold. Not the bright flash of surprise or delight, but the quiet kind, the kind that stays. She folded the bag and put it in her medical kit with the care of someone storing something irreplaceable. BOLO found Ren at the ship, doing the final walk around. They fell into their usual rhythm without thinking about it. Ren pointing at components, BOLO handing tools, both of them communicating mostly through gesture and expression and the shorthand they had built up over 7 weeks. They were mostly finished when BOLO stopped and asked, in the direct way that Ren had come to rely on, "Are you coming back?" Ren stopped. He stood with a calibration tool in one hand and said nothing for long enough that it became its own kind of answer. Then he reached into the case on his belt and took out the weather device he had built for BOLO 3 weeks ago, the small disk that read atmospheric ion patterns and predicted conditions for the next few hours. He had been working on it again in the evenings. Put it in Bolo's hand, IT was heavier than Beyond the Lookout remembered. He looked at it. The display showed not just weather now. It showed a secondary reading, a faint line across the top of the screen, scanning. "What's this?" BOLO asked. Ren tapped the display. He made a slow, large arc with one finger, the gesture he used for long distance. He pointed upward. He pointed at the device. He tapped the scanning line. BOLO stared at it. He looked up at Ren. "It reads Vorth ion trails," he said. "Across how far?" Ren held up 2 fingers. He pointed at the sky. 2 light years. "So I'll know," BOLO said. "When you're close." Ren put the calibration tool away. He gave Beyond the Lookout one slow, deliberate nod. Not the quick acknowledgement gesture he used for minor things, but the deep one, the one BOLO had only seen the crew use for things that mattered. Then Ren went back to work, because that was how Ren handled things that were too large for words. Ara was at the far end of the yard, alone, looking at the ship. She stood the way she always stood when she was thinking, still for legs grounded, arms at her sides, ridge lights doing their slow, thinking blue. Nadia walked over and stood beside her. Neither of them spoke for a while. "We came here broken," Ara said. Her language had gotten easier over the weeks. Not fluent, but enough. "We are leaving as something we do not have a word for yet. We call it fixed," Nadia said. Ara shook her head. "Fixed is what you were before you broke. This is not that." Nadia thought about it. She looked at the ship, the Vorth lines, and the human patches, and the new drive section that glowed a color that was not quite either of them. She thought about her father's rule. Not unfixable, just misunderstood. "Then we call it rebuilt," she said as Ara's ridge lights moved through a long, slow gold. She did not say anything else. She reached out and put one hand on Nadia's shoulder, a formal gesture, deliberate, the kind the crew used for something important, and held it there for a moment before letting go. They were all in the yard when the alarm went off. IT was not loud. It was a soft pulse from the ship's edge sensors, the long-range ones that had been running quietly the whole time they were there. A contact. Outer system. Small data probe. Dominion-designed IT had found the ion trail. It was scanning. Everyone was very still. Then Ara walked to the ship. Her stride was not a run, but it had no hesitation in it. She went up the ramp. The crew followed. No scramble, no chaos. They filed in with the cam of people who knew what came next. Ray, Nadia, and BOLO stood in the yard and watched the ramp close. The glow lines on the ship brightened. The new drive section lit deep blue. Ara's voice came from the ship's external speaker. She had learned how to use it 2 weeks ago. She spoke in her own language. Ren translated it later, from the recording BOLO had made without thinking about it. She had said, "We see you. "We are coming to you. Tell the Dominion that the fleet has changed." The ship did not launch the way it had crashed, chaotic, trailing smoke. It rose clean and fast, faster than anything Ray had seen in the air, and it turned toward the outer system with a precision that the original vessel had never been capable of. The probe disappeared from all sensors 11 seconds later, in the sudden quiet of the yard. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then BOLO looked down at the device in his hand. The weather reading was clear. The scanning line at the top was quiet. He held it to his chest like something he was not going to put down for a very long time. 8 months after a Vorith ship left a scar across a Missouri cornfield, the Alliance launched 43 warships into the Veth corridor. The Dominion was waiting for them. The Dominion was always waiting. Their intelligence was precise, their tactical models deep, their patience without limit. They had fought the Alliance for 19 years, and they knew every vessel class, every formation, every predictable response the Vorith fleet had ever made. They did not fear this engagement. They had already calculated its outcome. The Alliance fleet that came through the corridor did not match any of their models. These were Vorith ships. They could see that in the hull signatures. But they moved differently. They flew in looser formations that tightened and spread with no predictable timing. When the first Dominion strike hit, the target ship did not fail at the point off impact. It flexed. It redistributed. It kept moving. The hit that should have taken it out of the fight left it slower and angrier and still fully armed. The Dominion targeting systems recalculated. Fired again. The second ship in their crossfire was not where their models said it would be. It had moved into a position no Vorith commander had ever used before, imprecise by standard training, completely effective in practice. The Dominion recalculated again. And again. And again. They were still recalculating when Ara's ship came through the center of the corridor at a speed the original vessel could never have reached. Ara's ship was the prototype. It was the thing that Ray's welding and Nadia's blueprint San Ren's impossible hours had built. It carried Vorith crystal lattice precision in its core and human redundancy wrapped around every system like armor that breathed. It had been struck 3 times in the approach to the corridor. It had not stopped once. Ara flew it herself. She had always commanded from the bridge, but today she flew because she needed to feel what the ship could do through her own hands. She needed to know if it was real that IT was real. She pushed the drive past the tolerance range the original vessel had been rated for. The new framework absorbed the load. She drove the ship into a split-angle maneuver that Vorith training manuals listed as unadvised. Too much structural stress, too much risk. The ship held the angle. The Dominion targeting lock that had been tracking her for 11 seconds broke apart. She came out of the maneuver already firing. Behind her, the 42 other ships of the rebuilt class fleet were doing the same thing in their own ways. Not identically, because they had been modified by different hands in different shipyards, each one carrying the human framework, but shaped by whoever had put it together. They were not a perfect formation. They were 42 different answers to the same question. How do you fight something that learns by watching you? You change what it sees. The Dominion held for 40 minutes. This was longer than most engagements. The Dominion did not break easily, and even confused, they were dangerous. 3 Alliance ships took critical damage. 1 was destroyed. Ara felt each loss like a physical thing. But she kept moving. She kept changing. Every time a pattern started to emerge, she broke height. Every time the Dominion found a lock, she redistributed, rerouted, pushed the ship through something that should not have worked and did. Her ridge lights were gold the entire time. Not the flashing gold of surprise. Not the slow gold of quiet feeling. The full, sustained gold of someone fighting with everything they have and knowing, for the first time in years, that everything they have is enough. The crew noticed. They had never seen a commander fight with their ridge lights blazing. It was not the Vorith way. Composure in battle was a point of pride. Emotion kept contained. But Ara's lights were blazing, and she was not failing, and they were not breaking. And something shifted in the crew. Something loosened. They started fighting differently. Not by the book. Not by training. They started fighting the way they felt. The Dominion fleet retreated at the 41-minute mark. Not a tactical withdrawal, a retreat. Sensors tracked them pulling back in a pattern that had never been recorded in 19 years of war. An acknowledgement that the engagement was lost. Aura held the corridor. In the silence after. A Vorith admiral by the name of Soren contacted her from the command ship at the rear of the fleet. He was old, had been fighting this war since before Aura had her first command. His voice carried the weight of someone who had stopped expecting to be surprised. "What happened to your ships?" he asked. Aura looked at the corridor around her. At the rebuilt class fleet, holding, glowing, none of them quite identical, all of them still standing. She thought of Ray's yard. The hot dogs. The roof at night. A boy who refused to leave. A woman who drew until dawn. A veterinarian who drove over without being asked. A dog that sat in blue light and wagged its tail. "We stopped being alone," she said. Soren was quiet for a long moment. "Send me the blueprints," he said. 6 weeks later, the Alliance began refitting its entire fleet. They did not call the ships rebuilt class in the official records. That was too informal, too strange, not the kind of designation that went in military history. But the crews who flew them used it. It passed from ship to ship the way things do when they mean something. The war did not end immediately. Wars do not end immediately. But the Veth corridor was the last battle the Dominion won. After that, every engagement went differently. Every time the Dominion thought they had recalculated, the fleet changed again. The fleet had learned from people who had built a civilization around the simple fact that things break, and that breaking is not the end. On a farm in Missouri, on a night when the sky was very clear, Bolo was sitting on the roof of the barn. He had the device in his lap, the way he often did when he came up here. He used it for weather mostly. It was very accurate, but he always checked the scanning line. It had been quiet for 8 months. He had stopped checking it every hour. He checked it the way you check something you believe in, even when it isn't showing you anything yet. The scanning line pulsed. Once. Twice. A pattern he recognized from the readouts Run had shown him. 2 light years. Incoming, specific ion signature. Bolo sat up straight. He looked at the sky for a long time. He could not see anything yet. He would not see anything for a while. But they were coming, and he knew it. And that was enough. He did not go inside. He sat on the roof and watched the dark and waited, the device warm in his hands, the Missouri night quiet around him, the stars the same as they always were and completely different all at once. And somewhere in the deep, moving through the dark between stars, Dyra sat in a small growing pod in the lower deck of Aura's ship. The pod had been Ren's idea, a section-off hull space repurposed, lined with growth material, lit by a panel tuned to the right spectrum, in the center of it. In a pot made from salvaged component casing, a small green plant reached its first leaf toward the light. Dyra sat cross-legged on the floor and watched it the way she watched critical patients, with complete attention, with steady care, with the quiet knowledge that the most important thing you can do for something that is trying to grow is simply be there while it does. The leaf uncurled. It was very small. It was perfect. Her ridge lights glowed gold.